All right. Just want to welcome everybody back to another episode of Scholastic Conversations here with the Entrepreneurial Theologian Podcast. Today, I have another special guest. I met this brother some years ago. He has become a friend, a mentor, and he is definitely a scholar. I am going to introduce you to Dr. Stephen Redmond, and I just want him to come to the stage right now and tell us a little bit about himself. As you can see here, he is the chaplain and professor of religion at Russ College in, is it Holly Springs,
Yes, Holly
Mississippi?
Springs, Mississippi. Yes,
All right.
yes.
Brother, I'm going to let you have the floor here for a second to introduce yourself, and then I'll come back up and ask you some questions.
Thank you, Brother Jackson. And I'd like to say hello to everyone that's out there. Yes, my name is Dr. Stephen Redmond, and I currently serve as the chaplain and professor of religion at Russ College, newly appointed, and proud to be there. Previously, I served as the disaster response warehouse manager and volunteer coordinator for the North Georgia Conference of the United Methodist Church here in Georgia. And I served in that position for 5 years. That's more in the missional ministry side. But yes, now I'm happy to take on this new appointment at Russ College. I attended undergrad at Russ College, so hey, that is a going back home, and going back home at 54 years old, I feel this is a blessing. And just to be on the campus again of an HBCU, to be able to share and to be able to learn from this generation is a blessing from God. And I really accept it and hold it to my heart. In addition to Russ College, and I'm an alum of Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University, which is Daytona Beach, Florida. I received my MBA from there. I went to seminary at Candler School of Theology, Emory University here in Atlanta. And I completed my doctorate of ministry at Southern Methodist University, Perkins School of Theology. In addition to those, I love taking classes. In the summertime, I love taking classes at diverse seminaries because it gives me multiple perspectives on thoughts, on theological thoughts. So I've attended Yale. I've attended Boston University for a course. I've attended Wesley Theological Seminary in D.C. and what else? Gammon School of Theology, ITC. So I like to kind of float around to hear different theological perspectives from different schools to continue learning. I pray to always be a person that is driven to learn and to learn new things and to engage new concepts and to be open. My hobbies are traveling, and yes, I'm a foodie. I love to work out as well, so I try to keep the balance in there. And just sharing the spirit of God with others. That's something that I enjoy doing. And so that is who I am. Thank you. Thank you, Reverend.
Well, Doc, I appreciate you giving that introduction to who you are. I know we met several years ago at at a um, at a conference. It was the what was it? The Forum of Theological Exploration.
Yes, yes,
Yeah, I
for the
think
Youth Theological Institute program.
yes, sir, yes, sir. And I
Yeah, the one
remember
that was,
sitting in classes with you.
mhm.
What was that?
Yes, I accompanied Dr. Warren G. Booker
Yes.
Jr. He then was the professor of religion at Russ College. He's retired now, but right, I accompanied him there, and I had a great experience. It was a great experience there. Kind of, it's another learning experience. Mhm.
Yeah, it definitely was. I remember sitting in those classes with all those different scholars, and it opened me up to all of the different ways that theologians interact with the world
Mhm.
outside of the, just outside of the classroom. It being, stuck in a classroom teaching all of the time.
Mhm.
The Theological Institute. It showed me that scholars are everywhere and
Yeah.
doing the work of the kingdom everywhere. Now, Doc, I know we had talked about this. One of the things that we talked about while we were there in Indianapolis uh, you made a comment in class one day, and I could not wait to get you on this podcast for you to talk about that particular subject and everything. But before we go to that, I'm gonna give you a little bit of time to think about that one right there. But before we go to that, can you share a little bit about some of the research that you're working on? I know, if I remember it right, you're in the final stages of finishing up
Right.
your book. So can you tell us a little bit about your research and
Yeah.
what you're working on for your project?
Okay, my title of my project is called Exclusive Theology, a theological reflection of the beliefs and values of North Georgia Methodists. And what drew me to this was really a question I asked my grandmother, even prior to going to seminary. I asked my grandmother, I said, how did we become United Methodists? I never knew, I just grew up in the tradition. And I'm from Lexington, Mississippi, which is in the Delta. And so I would drive my grandfather to church every Sunday, to these 3 different churches throughout the Delta every Sunday. And I noticed that all of his churches primarily were located on the fringes of cotton fields. And so one day I asked him, like, Dad, he was my grandfather, but I called him Dad. I said, Dad, how did we become Methodists? Why is your churches always located in these cotton fields? Well, he replied to me then. He said, well, because the church, it belonged to the slave owner. And so the slave owner established the churches on plantations. And that just kind of struck me, to see a small white Methodist church in Etta Bena, Mississippi, on the side of a bayou, but across the street, here's a cotton field that stretched, I know, for nearly 20 miles, and is located on Emmett Till's Highway. And so that kind of struck me. So when I went to my grandmother later on, years after he had passed, and asked her, I said, how did we become Methodist? She said, I don't know, Steve. Now, she was a well-read person. My grandmother was from Noonan, Georgia. She grew up N.U.V.I.S.I.O.N. And she said, I don't know. And so that question really bothered me. Like, okay, we spent a lot of time talking about United Methodists, attending meetings of United Methodists, but we really didn't know the heritage of the church itself. So when I began to research seminaries, I did not go into seminary thinking that one day I'll become a United Methodist minister. I'm going into ministry at all. I went to seminary really to understand our history and how it connected to this denominational church. Well, while I was at Candler School of Theology, which is Candler School of Theology, kind of give you a little background on it. It was really the school, one of the primary schools of the Confederacy. It was also a school that helped to develop the education for the plantation owner's sons, those who particularly were either in medicine or business. So while I attended there, I began to see volumes of research within both of his libraries, the Pitt Library and the Woodruff Library. And so a lot of information that dealt with slave ownership in the Caribbean. It dealt with slave ownership in the American South. And also it dealt with the Ku Klux Klan and the Confederate Army. And so it was talking about the Southern heritage, the Southern Methodist heritage. And the Black folks that was affiliated with that Southern Methodist heritage was typically the slaves of the owners who attended that college. And the Methodist clergy would come out of Canada, and they would serve or be appointed throughout the different churches throughout the U.S. South and in the Caribbean. So that really inspired me to look deeper into the matter and to take it deeper. I served in the Marine Corps. And so I noticed that there was a connection in the Marine Corps to the Marine Corps emblem, which is the eagle, globe, and anchor, and also the Confederate flag, and nowadays the Tea Party flag. So I began to notice those flags, particularly in Georgia and South Carolina, will be flown together. And as a person that was in the Marines, I used the technique that I learned in the Marine Corps. Pretty much every Marine will learn the basics to recon, how to go and recon, how to go and pull information from individuals or from institutions, but you're doing it with inside of the institution itself. And so another source that kind of motivated me with it, and it's something my mother turned me on, it was a movie called The Spook That Sat Beside the Door. In that movie, and I think the author's name, his name is Dr. Greenlee. And in that movie, there was a Black man who went to sit inside the CIA, who applied for the position, but not to go in to be an agent so much, but he went to go in to learn the internal workings of the agency and to take that information back to the Black community. So those three things really inspired me to do this research. And I think what really stood out to me in the research was my first attempt was to think that I was going to be done with an N.U.V.I.S.I.O.N within the first 5 years. I said, hey, I'll be done with this. But once you begin to study the history of Methodism and in its relationship to the African American community, to the Caribbean, and to South America, you find that not only did they have plantations, for instance, in the state of Georgia, the Methodists owned 26% of slaves in the state of Georgia. But when you go in the Caribbean, you literally have whole islands like Antigua that was totally colonized by the Anglicans, but later by the Methodists, who are one of the same group. And that pretty much went up through the Caribbean and into the American South, coming in through South Carolina and working its way up north and westward. And so I spent probably the next 10 years on this research, staying on plantations, working on plantations, particularly with this organization called UMCOR, United Methodist Committee on Relief. Well, its mother campus is in Baldwin, Louisiana. And in Baldwin, Louisiana is where they shot the film Tarzan in the Louisiana jungle. That was the first film that was shot there. And so while there, you heard about slave breeding. A lot of plantation life, it survived through the means of slave breeding, in that of Black women. So, for instance, the school, Emory University, will send out its doctors into these plantations who function both as doctor and as clergy. And so they oversaw the reproductive systems of Black women. In addition, on those slave breeding plantations, you also had this studying where Black men had really no value other than studying and being masculine and being physical to pick whatever produce they needed to do, harvest, pick, and plow whatever produce they needed to do. Well, on the opposite end, you had the Black woman, who was also used as a slave breeding machine. And you kind of see the correlation between the plantation up into today's society when you're dealing with things like the Department of Human Services when it comes to child support. Some of the same elements exist in both of those societies. Also, on these plantations, in the research, you hear about things like opioid addiction, right? Drug addiction. It was caused the slave masters and the slave breeders and the manager of these plantations. For any time the enslaved persons will suffer, particularly from STDs, which ran rapidly on these plantations, they would give them rum and opioids to kind of heal the pain. So what you have is the drug addiction that we see now within the Black community that has been long a part of our existence here in America and also within the Caribbean. A lot of that started on the plantation systems. And the same thing with the abusive relationships, the loss of relationships, the loss of love. This stuff is just a continuation from one generation to another generation. It continues to go to the next generation. In addition to that other element, I want to know the role really of the church. Well, the role of the church at that point in time, particularly on the plantations, it was to create this idea of slave religion. It was slaves obey your masters, and by doing this, you were being obedient to God. That became a common theme on plantations. However, voodoo, from which we are internally inspired, that which came out of our African origin, was always present within us. That is what made us stand and rise and continue to fight against all the oppressive means that we faced. And so for me, it was understanding the Methodist Church in its previous position on the issue of racism. In today's time, in American Methodism today, although we have a number of Black bishops, the church is still predominantly 98% white. We have less now in the United Methodist Church, 2% Black. So it still functions in a slave religion type of culture. Our HBCUs or the HBCUs affiliated with the United Methodist Church, there are 13 of them. In comparison with the PWIs, your Emory's, your Dukes, your SMUs, your Boston Universities, your Syracuse. Well, when you look at Russ College and you look at Gammon School of Theology, you look at Bethune-Cookman, you look at Wiley and the other HBCUs, Bennett, the economic disparity is so large. For instance, Emory University boasts of an economic, of an endowment of over $12 billion, and so does Duke. But when you look at institutions like Russ, that's a part of the very same system, their endowment is in the high $30 million mark. And so you're still looking at that racial gap that's there, that's continued to be perpetuated through each generation. And yes, we vote, and we've been voting now for a long time, over 100 years. However, even within that system, you still have, we're voting to fit into an American establishment that upholds racism. Although we're trying to tear down the walls, but one of the primary walls of racism still lies within capitalism. Capitalism in and of itself promotes and benefits from racism. Even the voting institution itself benefits from racism. And so my research tapped upon this kind of this cultural enslavement that is perpetuated from one generation to the next. Thank you, Reverend. Yes, sir.
Doc, I mean, every time I talk to you, man, you blow my mind with all of the research that you do and the connections that you made. I've never heard that connection between the Marine Corps flag and the Confederate flag and the Georgia Mississippi flag and how you made that connection right there, man.
Well, you got to think that the Marine Corps, for instance, here in the South, on Parris Island, I mean, that's where your main training facility. That at one time was a plantation. It was the Marines that went through the Caribbean that secured most of the islands in the Caribbean. But they was the Royal British Marines, but they functioned under the Church of England, which is the Anglican Church, for which the Methodist Church grew out of. And so in the state of Georgia and the state of South Carolina, they are very patriot to the Old South and to the old Southern traditions, right? So when you see the Confederate flag and the Marine Corps flag and the United Methodist flag all flown together, and now the Tea Party flag all flown together, those are symbols that represent a heritage of a lost cause, of a confederacy. And so in the Marine Corps was the last, it's not a branch of the military, it's a branch of the Navy. It belongs to the Navy. However, they was the last to accept non-whites in. And so they held to a tradition of confederacy. And so in the Confederate Army, particularly in states like Georgia and South Carolina, the Marine Corps takes on a very conservative point of view. And for a large number of whites who are Methodists, who serve in the Marine Corps in this area, it became a part of their heritage. When I was in boot camp, I was literally told that an N could not be a Methodist. I did not understand at the time what he meant when he told me that an N could not be a United Methodist. But later on, talking to a historian at Russ Chapel, which is in Oxford, Georgia, he said that the reason that he said that an N could not be a United Methodist, because earlier pre-1866, a Black person could not be officially a member of the Methodist Church themselves, but you were more like an affiliate because your owner was a member. So you could not be. So I was a young man during that time period, 19 years old when I was told that, but I remembered that. And so when I got into this research, I began to see the overlapping of how conservatism worked and militarism worked, particularly in the southeast of the United States, Georgia and South Carolina in these states. Well, because it became a part of the Marine Corps, the Confederacy, the United Methodist Church, all was interwoven within this area. In this area, in the South, the Confederacy was made up of 85% Methodists in the South. In the North, it was made up of 80% Methodists in the Northeast. So when you're talking about the Civil War internally was pretty much seen as a Methodist war. And it started from James O. Andrews, who owned a young woman that they call Miss Kitty from Oxford, Georgia. Well, the church split in 1844 over him owning the ownership of this woman. He was a bishop. Then the church outlawed for its clergy, its laity of owning slaves. However, the bishop refused to give up his slave. He kind of lied and said that he had done it, but he didn't. So in 1844, that scrimmage inside of the Methodist Church led to the division of the Methodist Church, which became the Methodist Church South and the Methodist Episcopal Church North, which later on became the division between the North and the South of the Confederate Army. And so, and throughout this time period, you still had that Marine Corps culture that was there. You still had that Confederacy was being built on top of that. The Methodist Church was being built. And so you had generations upon generations of persons that looked at military service, that looked at the Methodist Church, and that looked at the Southern way of life as being their united heritage. And they carried that forward into today, which is known as the Tea Party unit. So this is just a continuation of this.
And so you brought up another thing right there. Do you think that that's the reason why so many Southerners say that it's about heritage and not about hate?
Yes, but it's both. I mean, because they intertwine. When you're talking about the Confederacy and you're talking about the construction of the Confederacy, well, the Confederacy was primarily constructed to maintain slavery. That was its key point. And the reason that they wanted states' rights over federal rights, because the federal government at that point in time wanted to push beyond slavery, not because it wanted to accept blacks. No, you're talking about one of the first plans was sending blacks to them back to Africa to help colonize Africa. So it wasn't a love for black folks. It was really just did not have the means to do that through the Freedom Aid Society or the Federal Bureau. So they push for states' rights so they can maintain institutions of slavery. And so you had and since a lot of your slave owners were well-to-do, they affiliated themselves with the Methodist Church as a means. That was a kind of, the Methodist Church was a government within a government. You had your federal body, your state body, but also the Methodist Church in the 1800s was looked at as a political party from within it. And so they were holding on to this heritage that dealt with the Anglican Church, that dealt with slave ownership, also that dealt with white supremacy. They had been groomed on this from generations to generations. So for them, the idea of white supremacy was not something wrong. For them, it was something innate. It was something that they thought was absolutely true. They believed it and they acted upon that belief. And so any advancements of black folks in the South, that meant retaliation because it went outside of the social order and the social norms. And let's not forget the rest of America at this time period as well was also practicing de facto slavery. Although it was legal in the South, it's not like the North just automatically overturned it. No, they were still practicing it in many different ways, but it just wasn't described as slavery in the same way it was in Britain as well and the Caribbean. It was, it's a heritage that still exists today. It's a heritage that we see in the 2024 presidential election. that's trying to be protected is a heritage that is not only anti-Black, is anti-non-white. It comes off in many different forms. It is politically motivated and is economically financed. And it really represents the characteristic of a snake, because you really don't know how to approach it. It comes in many different forms and and it's unannounced. And so it is something we have to really to study as a community, to really look at seriously, because it's very dangerous. Um, it it continues to be re-inspired through many different movements, like we see in the Tea Party movement today. And also, it does have an element of crossing across racial lines. When you look at the Black ministers of the 1800s, that was serving in the plantation churches, a lot of those Black ministers were the keepers of the white slave masters, right? So the white slave masters would dictate to them on how to relate to the Black community, particularly the Black church, which then was the governing body of the Black community, the Black church. And so they will instruct the Black ministers on what to say, on what to do. That was an element of slave religion. It was controlling the Black community outside of the Black community, where if the owner no longer, the slave maker, the slave master no longer had time to go sit in the congregation to oversee the congregation itself, the Black minister would be given different tokens and benefits to act in the best accordance to the plantation and the plantation owner. And so it kept the slave society safe for the plantation owner. It also elevated the Black minister to a status in the community, and it maintained order. However, there were plantation ministers that functioned on both sides of the fence. There were many spooks that sat beside the door. There were so many spooks that sat beside the door, they could not maintain the slave system. And so what white slave owners did then, when they no longer could maintain it, because the Black power structure kept increasing, kept coming in Haiti, throughout the Caribbean, in the American South, there were so many slave revolts that they had to overturn slavery. It wasn't because it was the benevolence of their heart. No, it was because of the fearlessness of Black folks who was willing to die not to be enslaved to them. And so once that came into reality, that Black people were willing to die and to kill for their freedom, then they found it necessary to overturn the law. For instance, here in the city of Atlanta, you hear about the story of the Union Army sacking Atlanta, and all of a sudden Atlanta really becoming the poster child for the turn of the Civil War. Well, really, what inspired the overturn of Atlanta was the Black folks who actually was burning buildings and tearing this place up, who was fighting long before the Union Army had even come. They had Black banks even before the late 1800s. They had Black schools even before there became regulated Black schools under Dr. Orr and under Dr. Haygood, who implemented what I call slave religion of today, which is the modern day HBCU. That was the third colonization, which was the HBCU development after the Civil War. That was another attempt to control the Black mind through the funding of the HBCUs. And I'm not talking about the state-owned ones. I'm talking about the private religious ones. I'm talking about the missionary colleges. That was another attempt to control or create this idea of the talented 10th through fraternities and sororities and this bourgeoisie class.
Ooh, bruh, man, this one right here may get me kicked off of social media, man, because you are dropping some knowledge right here, brother. I mean, you said so much stuff. There were so many different questions that I wanted to ask you. One of the things that came up, I'm gonna go back to what you said about, I think you pronounced it Odu.
Udu.
Udu is how you pronounce it. We're going to go back to that Udu comment and everything. I also want to touch on something that you said about I know you talked about the slave religion with the HBCUs, and one of the other things that you touched on was talking about using Black ministers to control the minds of the Black masses and everything. I know you're telling the truth on that, because in the faith tradition that I grew up in the Churches of Christ, for years we were taught about the pioneer preachers, and basically we couldn't say anything against anything that the pioneer preachers did or believed or anything. But as I started doing research, I found out some of the things that the backroom deals that the pioneer preachers were making and everything, because they were actually teaching what the financiers were encouraging them to teach. And when I started making that connection, it's like, oh, no wonder. I don't know if you know much about the Churches of Christ, but the way we were taught growing up is that everybody else was going to hell and we were the right church. And one of the biggest things that we were taught to do was we were taught to go and save the souls of those Baptists. To save the souls of people that were not the Blacks that were not members of the Church of Christ. And as I started doing the research, I saw some of what you were talking about in your last dialogue. Of it was about trying to convince them out of the Black tradition that they had grown up in, that Black church tradition, the Black prophetic tradition, to actually try to convince them that they were wrong for being a part of that tradition, and trying to get them to come over to the one true church. And I started making a connection at a park, at an event that this brother was having there in Pulaski, Tennessee. And I'll never forget, I heard this brother, this older gentleman, praying. And his prayer sounded just like this cousin of mine that has long passed away. His prayer sounded just like Brother Jesse's. And I'm like, hold on. I'm like, he's saying the same exact prayer that I heard Brother Jesse say for years when I was a kid. And I'm like, they prayed the same way. So why the difference when it comes to religious thinking? And I started to find out that the history of the Churches of Christ, it was heavily involved in slave owning.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, so have I been a part of this slave religion? And I found out, yes, Robert, you were.
Yeah, the main thing for religion in the catechism of Black folks, it was to maintain the plantation system and to subdue slave revolts. That was the primary goal of all the Protestant religions as they engaged the plantations and as they engaged the Mayans. Particularly the Mayans was kind of pretty much in the Caribbean area. It was to colonize them. It was to outlaw their own religions, Udu, and spiritual beliefs, because they felt within their own religions and spiritual belief that they had some internal connection to their ancestry and to their past, which may lead to a revolt. In a revolt, in economic terms, it was a loss of profits. So when you're talking about Protestant religions, and you're talking about anything that really falls up under, you're talking about Methodism, Baptist, Presbyterian, Episcopalians, anything that kind of falls up under that Protestant tradition that invested in the slave trade, for which all of them did, it was really to maintain the plantation life. The churches got their wealth, the denominational churches got their wealth from the plantations. The churches were They function as banks. They function as publishing companies. They will put out propaganda. They work hand in hand with the local newspapers during the periods of slavery to promote their message. The church was hand in hand with the government in maintaining the system of slavery. And when people, particularly within the Protestant tradition, when you look at the founders of these denominations, in today's time, you hear stories that they may have been abolitionists. For instance, John Wesley within the Methodist tradition, it's quite common for people to announce John Wesley as an abolitionist. But however, during the time John Wesley was in the colony of Georgia, and during his visits to the colony of South Carolina, he blessed the earlier plantations and helped to establish the plantation systems. And in the state of Georgia, his contemporary implemented slavery in the state of Georgia. His name was George Whitefield. And so John Wesley would send publications out through the SPC, which was the propagation of the gospel. It was how to colonize. How to colonize the slaves through different scriptural quotes on how to, you had songs, you had prayers that helped to maintain these systems. And then later on, after England pushed to abolish slavery, not because of the grace of their heart, but because they had a new industrial source coming out of India. When they went to abolish slavery, at that point in time, those very slave owners and founders of slavery then became abolitionists. So in some of the books you'll hear about them, some of the earlier texts that you don't find as much, you'll hear their involvement in slavery, but then later on in life, you'll hear about how they were such great people in anti-slavery. Well, the matter to that is they were really both. They were slave trader abolitionists. In their earlier years, when England was heavily invested in the slave trade, they were slave owners and profiteers of slavery. However, when England began to move away from slavery, keep in mind, England governed the Caribbean and the Americans largely. So when they began to move away from slavery, they began to speak against it. So they became now seen as opposers to slavery. But they played both roles. They were loyalists to the crown. However, but the main purpose of Protestant religion in the Caribbean, as well as in the Americas, North and South, was there to colonize the people. For the first 150 years, even before Blacks really became introduced, Africans became introduced into slavery in the Americas and in the Caribbean, the Native Americans, the natives, has spent 150 years enslavement. And then it was through the enslavement of the indigenous people in these regions that helped to finance the African slave trade. Then after the African slave trade, at the end of the African slave trade, then you had now an Asian slave trade coming in. So you had three different trades on top of each other. And it was really to finance these systems. So religion has always been used as a means to oppress those who are not a part of that heritage. Now, I know we can find hope in our faith and find hope in our religion and find liberation in our religion. However, in its earlier days, and sometimes even in present day, it was a system used to colonize and to maintain plantation systems. Plantation systems were producing wheat, they were producing rice, they were producing sugarcane. And so that is why the churches will be in the midst of the plantations, is to maintain order on the plantation. And so they needed a message of slave, obey your master. They needed a message of slaves, do not steal. They didn't mean that the slaves didn't steal from the other plantation owner. It meant that the slaves would not steal from their plantation. So religion played a major role in helping to maintain the slave systems. And it continues to play a major role in the global community in helping to maintain marginalization and oppression.
Man, golly, man. you said something in that last bit there about the I can't remember exactly how you said it. I think you said something like they go hand in hand. You made me think about a term that I use. I call it the Trinity of evil.
Mm.
Uh,
Mhm.
Whiteness, um, the church, and the government, and how the three of them have this this connection to each other,
Mhm.
to where they work off of each other to oppress people who are, as one of my buddies calls it, othered.
Mhm.
And you touched on that a lot in that last dialogue, and you keep bringing this up. So I'm gonna go ahead and touch on this, get you to touch on this some more, and then I want to ask you a question about going back to education, because I think you're, in what you're saying here, I think you're making a connection to another thought of something that I was told not too long ago. So you keep bringing up Udu,
Mhm.
and if I'm not mistaken, this is what we have known over the years to be hoodoo, correct?
I know what Udu is what the Europeans call voodoo.
Oh, okay.
Is what
Can you
it
tell us a
was.
little bit more?
Well, Udu is a way of life. Udu was the connection to God, Shango. It was a connection to God, to our ancestors, to us, to the community. It was a way of life. It was a way of spirituality for us to exist together in harmony, in peace and love. Well, they had to strip that away. That was a part of the African identity, was to strip away our spirituality, or to attempt to strip away our spirituality. However, that spirituality continues to resurface, no matter what our religious tradition we go into. We can be Baptist. That is that singing in the back. That's that stomping, hand clapping. We can be Kojic. That's that drumming. We can be Methodist. That's that rhythm that we have as a people, because that's built within our DNA. So Udu is there. That's what connects us to each other. When we talk about, as Black people, the vibe and the soul of Black folk, that is what we're talking about. That spirituality. That's what Europeans call voodoo. That's what they attempted to outlaw in Haiti. But you cannot outlaw the essence of a people. You may be able to outlaw the language, but you cannot outlaw the internalness of people. And that's what they failed to understand during the revolts. They was trying to wonder, why can we not suppress these people to the point to them breaking? The reason that you could not do it, because we remembered our ancestors. Yes, we remembered mother, we remembered grandmother, we honored them. And so for us, God was not so much this type of monotheistic, uh, in the cloud, big person in the cloud, but God to us was universal. God was everything. God was he, she, it, them. It was the plants, it was the water, it's the air, it's everything that we breathe. On the surface, Black people can be Christian or Islamic or Hindu or Methodist or Catholic, but beneath the surface, Udu is going to remain there. We cannot erase it. There's nothing we can do to erase who we are under the sun. Our rhythm, the way we talk, the way we walk, the food that we eat, that's us. It's going to be us. That's that rebellious spirit that lies in us. Yes, we can adopt other religious understandings, and we can learn all the doctrines of the world. However, the natural relationship to mama and to daddy and to grandmama and to granddaddy and to the sun and to the soil and to the air and to the wind, it shall always remain, because we are people of the sun. We are connected to the Mayans. We are connected to these people. We are connected around the globe. So that's one reason you cannot subdue the spirit of Black folks or the spirit of no other people, because we're connected.
My brother, I appreciate you going into detail on that right there. I'll never forget. We were sitting in class, and you used the Americanized word, and you said, at the end of the day, I go home and I practice voodoo. And I
Yes.
knew exactly what you were talking about, brother, because it's a way for us to decompress
Right.
from all of the spirits that we deal with when we leave our houses,
Mm-hmm.
especially especially as Black people. Uh, Black men, I know Black women have the different things that they have to deal with and everything
Mm-hmm.
up on the face of this earth. They deal with what's the term? Is it misogynoir, where it's not only
Misogynistic.
them being looked down upon because they're Black, but also because they're a woman.
Woman, right. Mm-hmm.
um and how that came about, that brought about the tradition of womanist theology,
Mm-hmm.
because feminism didn't really feministic theology really didn't speak to them. It spoke to them as women, but it didn't speak to
Right. And
them
speak to
as
them as their
Black women.
right.
um yeah, man. You cannot strip away the essence of who a person is
Right.
at their DNA. And man, I appreciate you bringing that right there up. Um, Everything that you've said so far, it has made me think about, and I wish I could remember who said it, because I just heard it just a few weeks ago, that said something to the effect of, whiteness is afraid of Black intellect.
Mm-hmm.
And everything that you've brought up so far has made me think about why it was so why slave owners were so adamant to make sure that we did not that our ancestors did not get educated. The stuff that you're bringing out today, you're showing why it was such a problem for enslaved people to be educated. So you're having this education plus what the very essence of who they were at the time and everything, and you're marrying those two together and everything. So that would make sense of why you had to control the religion, why you had to control the publications that you were talking about, how you had to make sure that your propaganda was in order. I read something recently where there were some scholars that were debating, and they were trying to discredit a document that I read several years ago. It was called King Leopold III's letter uh, to the missionaries of Africa. I've read that document several times, and whether it's true or not, whether it's myth or not, it looks very similar to what we've seen over the years with how missionaries have how let me not say all missionaries, how some missionaries have gone into different countries and just brutalized some of these countries, and the religion that they've given to these people, where they've stripped them of the essence of what you said, the essence of who they are, to bring them into this propagandistic, if that's even a word, way of viewing God. Um,
Well, I think
do,
the
you- do,
thing
you- do you
is,
have something to say on that one right there, and then
yeah,
then
the
I'll
thing
go
is,
into another thought.
when you're talking about the history of missions, the history of missions, it overlaps also the church. It overlaps with the mission of capitalism and expansionism and militarism. It was designed in its essence to colonize. It was from the earlier Dutch, French, and English ships that sent out voyages to and capture enslaved folks. I'm talking about globally, and with that, they sent out the priests with that as well as missions. They sent out foreign mission agencies, what they would call foreign missions then, to to set up churches through local informants, people that they trusted on the ground to establish mission housing. So it was a dual message being sent. It was one of helping you, while at the same time that was a one of colonizing you. So it was a dualistic system. The church was a system of capitalism. They all function. Keep in mind that the Protestant church comes out of the Church of England. It is the Church of England. Protestantism is the Church of England. The Church of England did not separate state from church. They were one combined unit that functioned for the betterment and the expansion of England during this time of war and expansionism. So the missionaries' primary job was an extension of the military. It was to help to colonize. It was to go on the ground and particularly engage folks in seeing themselves as friends. They wanted to introduce themselves to the local population or the indigenous people as friends to them. And their main thing was trying to get them to a point where they will stop resisting. While at the same time, they work hand in hand with the generals. Here in the state of Georgia, the colonization of Georgia came at the hands of John Wesley, who's the founder of the Methodist tradition, and General Oglethorpe. They were on the same ship. In fact, John Wesley served as General Oglethorpe's scribe. He was considered to be the foreign agent to missions to the Creek Indian and to the enslaved Black in the area, particularly in South Carolina. Although Georgia did not have, by legal sense then, it did not have enslaved persons because it wasn't legal. However, it was de facto in the state of Georgia. So when we talk about the history of missionaries today, in the same way we talk about the history of John Wesley, Wilberforce, they were slave trader abolitionists. This is a revisionist history. Revisionist history plays a major role in how we view history of missionaries in the 17 and 1800s. We typically review it from a white lens because within our academic setting, when you talk about, for instance, Russ College or Morehouse or Spelman or Clark, any of our church-related HBCUs, you're talking about earlier white missionaries. However, their main jobs during that primary time was still the colonization of now freed Negroes. This became really the initiation to the Jim Crow laws that really developed during the next 100 years. So they were still practicing this segregation and still presenting themselves as being friends to the Negro, while at the same time entrapping the Negro in a system of second-class citizenship under Jim Crow laws. So we must understand that missionaries are agents of the church, and the church is an agency of the government. They are licensed. When you're licensed as a clergy, you are approved by the denominational church, which gets its approval from the state and federal governments. So they function as one. And so when we think about the missionary as an individual, the missionary as an individual could have a heart of gold. However, the order that he or she is given is to serve that community by these guidelines. So that person can have a heart of gold. However, the strategic plan for that location typically does not come from them. They're the ground agent. The ordering agent is the bishops, is the district superintendents that oversee them. Yes.
Brother, I hadn't figured out how you hadn't gotten kicked out of the United Methodist Church, man, with all of this research, man.
Well, the thing is, you gotta speak the truth to your people.
That's right.
You can't really worry about. I know we get paid from the churches and the denominations, and this is our livelihood. These are our jobs. But at the end of the day, we have to answer truthfully to each other.
That's right.
Whether or not we never get ordained, or whether or not whatever is taken from us, it is what it is at the end of the day. The thing is, when we lay at the end of our life, when we're old and our grandkids walk up to us and we soon to become ancestors ourselves, is what message are we going to give to them? That I stood beneath a cross of oppression, or did I stand underneath the sun to provide you a future?
Yes, Lord. I love that right there, brother. Not being afraid. You said something earlier. I remember several years ago, I asked some preachers this question because I wanted to see where their mindset was. I asked them, I said, are you so dedicated to the cause of Jesus that you're willing to lose your life? And they looked at me very, very, very hesitantly, and they were like, Robert, that's a good question. I don't know about that. And so I wanted them to understand that it's not so much about physically losing your life. It's about you're going to die to something. You're going to something's going to be taken away from you, whether it be a paycheck, like you were just talking, or as
It could be your life.
Like our ancestors, Nat Turner, how he lost his life, N.U.V.I.S.I.O.N, other ancestors that have gone before us.
Even in
What's
modern
that?
day, I say, even in modern day time, the thing is, when we see a part of the colonization or the religious colonization process, it was to present Jesus to the enslaved and to the marginalized community through the lens of pacification. However, we failed to realize that Jesus was killed, and so was his brother James, for speaking out against Roman authorities, against the Palestinians, and what we now know as the Palestinians. And so the thing is, when we become so pacified with the denominational church, and we really begin to put Jesus into the concept of being a pacifist, and not putting Jesus into the concept of being a humanist, and being a freedom fighter for his people and for all people of oppression. And see, that's when we become a person who we preaching for our own salvation. However, Jesus died upon the cross not because he wanted to, it's because others put him there. And so did his brother. And we must acknowledge Jesus's mother. And when she did the Magnificat, she spoke against the evils of the world and what will happen to her children. Right? She had to flee because she was a revolutionary. And so that's when you said the European church, the Church of England, it revised the historical telling of Jesus' story. And it made him one, because when they had to present the story to the enslaved, they had to present it to the enslaved as being one of a pacifist, one of being someone that was meek and mild. However, when you really read the text and find out Jesus nor his brother James or his followers were very meek and mild, and if they were meek and mild, they would never been a threat to the Roman authority. So we are called, if we're truly called to the message of Christ in any form, in any way, then we are called to the message of being revolutionaries. And don't think that revolutionaries are not killed today. They're killed all around the world today. They're killed right here in our own communities, people who are speaking in our own communities, because injustice continue to go on. But what we're living in is we're still living in this cocoon of a white society, but we want to see it through rose-colored glasses. But it's still present. It's still present. One thing to me, going into being able to travel the world and seeing the oppression throughout the Caribbean, in the Middle East, I still see European oppression on a global scale. Because you see these communities in Jamaica, you see them in Haiti, you see them in the DR, Antigua. In today's time, they're surviving primarily off of customer service. That means that they have to be good to the millions of whites that are visiting those islands, not because they choose to be good to them, it's because they're being held in perpetual poverty if they revolt, if they act out. And so, and to be able to see these things firsthand, there's no way you can keep silent to it. I should keep silent to it. You can be silent to it because I see many that are. However, as people of Udu, yeah, you speak out against it and you act against it, not only preaching against it, but you become scholar practitioners. You don't mind getting your hands dirty. You teach, but also you put into action what you teach.
Man, scholar practitioners. I love it, brother. I love it. You made me think about all of the stuff. I got to touch on this right here. All of the stuff that's going on in this election cycle. You know, being introduced. I know it's been going on behind the scenes for several years now. Some of it's been put in order already, but this evil document that we know of as Project 2025. There was a part in there about the Department of Education, and I remember reading about that, and it was talking about making sure, essentially making sure that certain things were not taught, and maybe even trying to abolish the Department of Education as we know it right now, but making sure that things like diversity, equity, and inclusion were not talked about, making sure that even though they didn't have, I don't remember reading the specific terms, but I know they've been talking about it for some years now. Critical race theory, which it's a in my opinion, it's a myth, the way it's being presented to the masses, because they say that seminaries are teaching it. And I'm like, hold on, I just graduated from seminary back in 2019, and I never even heard the term until after I graduated. So I know you're lying on that right there. But how they're saying that people are saying that that CRT and DEI and all of the other terms that they have weaponized against, in my opinion, against us as a people, against anyone that is non-white, against anyone who is not heterosexual, against anyone who does not fit into the box that the powers that be say that we should fit into. Those are terms that are used against any of us, and I find it interesting that you know, to live in a time to see where propaganda has had so much influence on and I should say mythical thinking of what people are saying is going on, but it's actually trying to erase the history of what has happened here in this country, and to try to, in my opinion, and try to whitewash the history, the evil history of what this country has done, not only through the government, through religion, through society, through, like you said, the voting system, all of that right there. Can you speak a little bit about how this propaganda that is being used here in America, how these code words have taken front and center to fight against our communities, and how our communities can wake up to what's really going on right in front of our face?
Yeah, the global South, which is nations across the world. When I talk about the global South, and you're talking about Africa, you're talking about South America, the Caribbean, Asia. Well, when you're talking about the global South and you're talking about global migration, people of color are moving. They're moving globally, and so not only in North America, but also in Europe, there is this pushback against immigration. So with the growth of immigration, you also have a growth of cultural, you also have a growth of ethnicity, you have a growth of learning. So in that is to push back any of the historical accounts of these people of being oppressed, because the more they migrate, the more they integrate, the more they want to learn about themselves, and the more that they learn about what happened to them, that inspires them to even reach deeper within themselves to succeed on whatever level they can succeed. So the push is not a new push. It's not a new push through propaganda. I think a couple of moments ago, I talked about the SPG. That was the social propagation of the gospel, which was a public publication process for the Anglican Church throughout the Caribbean and the world then. That process is still going on today. It is to continue to ban people's faith of origin, to ban their culture, because we still are living in a global community where European exceptionalism and white supremacy is still dominant. It is still a place on this globe. A couple of years ago, I was in Rome. My wife and I was there. And it was this Sudanese sister who was running for political office in Rome. And they began to hang bananas up in the trees in Rome to protest her, and as an insult. Well, it was during that time, the propaganda was to stop immigration coming into Europe because of the threat that was causing into Europe. Because for them, it caused high terrorism. It was bringing in a different cultural dynamics. And so with that, there had to be a suppression of information. And simultaneously, what was going on, the things that were going on in Rome and through Southern Europe was also going on here in America with the southern border. It was to suppress the people and also to suppress their language. And the reason for this is because the reason that the southern border was put up in the first place, it was to keep, first of all, the people had to migrate. There was no southern border. They were going, the Mayans and the Aztecs were going in and out of today what we call North America, South America, and Central America. It was a free flow. There was no southern border and any of that set up. And so now that the people are beginning to come back home to their residence of origin, now there must be a suppression of their culture, a suppression of their history. And the same thing with Black Americans. Yes, we are connected to the Caribbean and from the Caribbean into Africa. And so that the books and stuff that you will get out of the Caribbean, they try to suppress them here in America. This is nothing new, to suppress the information and the history of a people when you're trying to maintain colonization. This is an ongoing fight. Colonization did not stop. It continues to move forward. But in this day and time, the difference is the people of color globally are moving. They continue to move at a rapid pace. And along the southern border, which also includes the Caribbean, and it also includes, you're talking about Mexico and Central America, they're simply moving home. And they're moving back into these regions, which you see a direct correlation to the change in voting. For instance, in Georgia, the reason that Georgia has been a purple state over the last couple of elections is because you have that migration moving in from the Caribbean and Blacks moving out of the North and out of the West into the state of Georgia. So you're seeing the power of change, not so much because of a strategy, but because of just sheer numbers. The absolute numbers of people living in the Caribbean. I think South America has about 325 million. I think the Caribbean has 125 million people, majority Black. So people are moving, they're migrating, they're coming through Atlanta's airport. They're coming across the border because there was no border lines. The Aztecs did not respect the Mexican-American border. There was no such thing. The Creek Indians and the Cherokees and the Choctaws, they did not respect the borders of Tennessee and the borders of Arkansas. They flowed naturally. And so they're back again flowing naturally. And this is what is becoming a threat to mainstream America. Kind of now when you hear in commercials, they're coming in and stealing your jobs and this, doing this. No, they're stealing your jobs. They're taking your jobs. And in fact, the predominant of American, predominant of Black and brown and yellow people that are coming in now are more entrepreneur spirit. So they're competing against McDonald's. You come to the state of Georgia, particularly Atlanta, you're going to find it's going to be a Jamaican restaurant almost in every community, which is competing directly with McDonald's. This is the threat. It is a capitalistic threat. Black folks now and Asian folks and Latino people, Arab people all across the world are becoming entrepreneurs, and they're learning this capitalistic game, and they're using it for their own benefit. This is the threat. And so if they can suppress the language, and if they can suppress the history and the knowledge of these people, and the knowledge and history continues to go. It continues to go. This is not something that's dated way back. No, we continue to make history every day. If they can suppress it by law, they can have within the school system that are predominantly yellow, brown, and Black. I will teach you now the American custom. Let me continue to teach you about a slave trader abolitionist, George Washington, but I don't want to teach you about Geronimo Pratt. I don't want to teach you about Harriet Tubman. I don't want to teach you about Bishop Oscar Romero's. People are demanding to learn about their own icons, their own historical figures, and this becomes a threat to mainstream America because they see the dynamics are changing, the demographics are changing, particularly in the American South on the lower level. They see that changing. This is becoming a threat to what they consider to be their country.
Brother, I appreciate you breaking that down right there. Oh man, you said some things that I have been telling folks is these folks are just coming back home.
Yeah, coming home.
They're just coming back home, and I could understand why the powers that be don't want the history being taught, because then these folks that are coming back home will understand what has happened to their ancestors, and
the thing is, they knew what happened. For instance, if you go to Yucatan, Mexico, and go to the pyramids in Yucatan, Mexico,
mm-hmm.
They actually pulled the soil from Georgia.
Wow.
That was thousands of years ago. They actually was able to haul the soil across the Caribbean or down through Central America into Yucatan from Georgia. They knew this was home.
Wow.
They always knew it was home. That's why people ask, like, why do El Salvadorians see Georgia as a place they want to come and reside in? Because this is where their ancestors are from.
Wow.
Right. When you talk about the Creek Indians that's over in Black Hawk, Mississippi, when it's like, why are they coming home? Because this is where they're from. It was, when you're talking about in the history of people of color, our history is 1,000 years old. But you're talking about a Mexican-American border that's a little over 100 years old.
Yeah.
Right? So they're still being told stories by their ancestors. That's the key. That's why they want to kind of push us into this kind of slave religion with these poster children and saying, hey, we want to colonize you to believe in this, because it takes you away from the teachings of your people.
Yeah.
However, they like to remain. Now, you can turn on the television any time of the day across any station, and you're going to always see European history. It's going to be whether it's Dracula, whether it is dragons, whatever European, you're going to always see European history being displayed on the television,
Yeah.
because they're teaching their children their history. However, it becomes such a phenomenon when you see things like Black Panther, or you see, for instance, Ku Klux Klan that's being played. That becomes so mind-blowing to us because it's not normal. That's not normal what we see on television when it talk about people of color. And so, but our history is a history that we trace through our ancestry. And they trace theirs through the same thing. They trace theirs through their ancestry in the same way. However, it benefits them. And when we do it, it benefits us. We are in a competition. We're in an economic competition, and we're in a human competition. And religion can be either used for a negative or a positive. I'm always asked, how can people read the Bible and then be in conflict with each other after reading the same scripture? You have the slave owner would read the same scripture as the enslaved, and they will be in conflict. Reason being is, for the slave owner, the scripture talked about his greatness from a point of being a slave owner. He saw his wealth as being a gift of God. And from the enslaved looked at the scripture as a point of liberation. And the reason that they looked at it at two polar opposite perspectives is because of their cultural backgrounds. They were in a cultural conflict with each other. We can read the same text, but what you read from it is what you get from your background. What I read from it is what I get from background. So it's going to keep you in conflict. And it's not bad to be in conflict, because humanity is always going to seek equity and inclusion. Always. You can put up as many borders as you want to. I try to put up as many borders as you want to. The only thing you're going to do is make people build taller ladders. They're going to keep fighting.
Oh yeah. You cannot stop the work of the divine.
No, you cannot suppress God. People are infused with the love of God, the energy of God, the desire to be free, the desire to reach towards the sun. They're going to, as tall as the wall you build, and it's going to be as high as the ladders they build.
That is correct. All right, brother. One final thing. I want you to think about this podcast going out to the entire world. From a global standpoint, what does Dr. Stephen Redmond want the entire world to know? What would be your parting thoughts from this interview of what you would want? Let me break it down like you did. What you want the Black community to know here in America, what you want the Black community to know globally, and what you want the rest of the world, because I heard you bringing everybody together in your conversations. What would be your parting thought to everyone?
It will be to travel, to seek, to love, to seek to understand, to engage in dialogue that is fearless, to learn from each other, become scholar practitioners, not only simply read, but actually put your hands on the work and on the labor, and to do it in a way that you actually uphold the humanity of everyone and not seek to exclude anyone based upon what you perceive is other. It's open our minds, our hearts, our souls to see that God is reflecting in everything and every person that walks and that is created. And that to know that any form of racism, any form of an ism of any kind that seeks to separate humanity from living out its full cause is an evil against God. That's what I would like to leave to the audience today. And I love you. In peace.
Dr. Redmond, I appreciate your time. I know you are a busy man, traveling back and forth between Atlanta and Mississippi. I just appreciate you sitting down with me, helping me to share some more knowledge with those that follow me on on social media and through my website, my
Mhm.
podcast, my blog. Just trying to do what I can to
Yeah. Mhm.
give back to everyone the things that I have learned over the years, the people that I've come in contact with. Y'all have definitely had an influence on me. I know we were just together for a couple of days in Indianapolis, but brother, you do not know how much of an influence you have had on me since that week, all of those years ago. And I want you to know from this podcast right here, so that it is on record,
Mm.
and it will be replayed, hopefully thousands of times over the coming days and the coming weeks. I want you to know, from brother to brother, I love you and I
Thank you.
appreciate
Yeah, thank you,
your
brother. Thank you.
scholarship. You are definitely thorough in everything that you do, and I enjoy just sitting at your feet and learning from you. I know you're not that much older than I am, but you are definitely uh, one of my young elders that I look
Mm.
up to,
Thank
and
you.
and the college there at Russ is going to be blessed just by your presence.
And I love to
The
welcome you when we
faculty,
set up
uh,
religious month. I love to welcome you down.
man,
Yeah.
yeah, man, they are going to be blessed, and man, I know once my buddies hear this right here, I know they're going to wish that they could tap into some of your classes. But just want to end, man. You definitely represent this T-shirt right here, Black Excellence, brother. And let me see if I can
Thank you,
move my
brother. Let me
microphone.
see. Someone that is
So
black and portrays great qualities, abilities, and make black community proud. Thank you, brother.
you,
Thank you.
you
Thank you.
definitely
Thank
make the Black community
you. Thank you.
proud, man.
Thank you, brother.
I
Thank you.
appreciate you, and may the Lord continue to bless you. This
Thank
was
you, brother.
another podcast here of the Entrepreneurial Theologian Podcast. The New Vision Ministries presents Scholastic Conversations with my dear brother, Dr. Stephen Redmond.
Thank
Appreciate
you,
you,
brother.
brother.
Thank you, brother. Thank you.